What would you do if the people you loved most saw you not as family, but as a living wallet? For Arthur, a 60-year-old widower, this nightmare became his reality. His own nephews, blinded by greed, tried to manipulate him, control his life, and seize his fortune. They thought the old man was losing his mind, but they were about to discover he was sharper, colder, and far more calculating than they could ever imagine. At 60, Arthur's world had been meticulously, cruelly, and methodically downsized by time. It had shrunk to the four walls of his quiet suburban house in a sleepy corner of Ohio, a space that still held the phantom echoes of a life lived fully. The faint scent of Eleanor's rosewater perfume sometimes clung to the curtains in the morning sun. The worn spot on the hardwood floor by the bay window was a ghost of where their dog Buster used to sleep. The silence, a presence so thick it felt like a weighted blanket, was only ever broken by the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall and the occasional, increasingly transactional, visits from his nephews, Leo and Daniel. They were his sister's boys, young and thrumming with the restless energy of their early 20s. They moved through his quiet home like a storm front, all loud voices, careless footsteps, and the unspoken expectation of charity. To them, Uncle Art was a relic, a kindly old man sitting on a pile of money he clearly didn't know what to do with. He was a story from a bygone era, a walking, talking ATM with a convenient cash-dispensing feature activated by a few hollow words of affection. And Arthur, adrift in the sea of his own loneliness, had let them. He gave willingly, foolishly, a desperate attempt to purchase their time, to fill the cavernous void in his own life with the brief, bright flashes of their fleeting presence. Each check he wrote, each bill he peeled from his wallet, was a misguided prayer that this time they might stay for dinner, that this time they might ask about his day and actually listen to the answer. But they never did. Their interest was as deep as a saucer of milk and just as quickly lapped up. He'd see the evidence of his loans bloom on their social media pages days later. Leo with a new, ridiculously expensive gaming headset, posing with a triumphant grin. Daniel clinking glasses at a rooftop bar where a single cocktail cost more than Arthur's weekly groceries. Each post was a small, sharp twist of a knife he had willingly handed them. He knew on some level that he was being played, but the alternative, the crushing, absolute silence, seemed so much worse. That is, until it wasn't. The breaking point didn't arrive with a bang, but with a quiet, pathetic click. It came on a crisp autumn afternoon, when the sky was a brilliant cloudless blue and the air smelled of wood smoke and decaying leaves. His 1967 Ford Mustang, a gleaming black pearl of a car, sat in the driveway. It was more than just metal and leather. It was a four-wheeled time machine. It was the car he and Eleanor had taken on their honeymoon, cruising down the Pacific Coast Highway with the windows down and the radio blasting. It was the car in which they'd brought all three of their kids home from the hospital. Every scratch on its chrome bumper was a story. Every worn patch on its leather seats was a memory. It was his last tangible connection to the man he used to be, and it refused to start. The engine turned over once, coughed a weak, asthmatic wheeze, and then fell silent. Nothing, just a click. A profound sense of helplessness washed over Arthur. He was no longer the young man who could diagnose an engine's ailment by sound alone. He was just old. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering for a moment, before he called the one person he thought he could count on. Leo. His voice, when he spoke, was laced with a hopeful vulnerability he instantly regretted. "Hey, kiddo," he began, trying to sound casual. "The Mustang won't turn over. Engine's dead. Could you give me a hand, maybe just a jump start or a look under the hood?" You're good with this stuff." The line went quiet for a beat too long. In that silence, Arthur could hear the subtle shift in the atmosphere on the other end. He could almost picture Leo's eyes rolling, the impatient tap of his fingers against his phone. Then his nephew's voice, sharp and dismissive as a shard of glass, cut through the connection. "Art, I'm swamped. Seriously busy. Can't you just call A? I mean, you've got the money." Before Arthur could even process the sting of the words, another sound bled through the phone. Daniel, audible in the background, letting out a short, cynical bark of a laugh. It was a laugh that said it all. "The old man and his stupid car. Can you believe he's bothering us with this?" The click of the phone ending the call was louder and more final than any backfire from the old car. It was the sound of a door slamming shut in his heart. It was the sound of the final straw, not just breaking, but shattering into 1,000 pieces. Arthur stood in his driveway, the silent car his only companion, and felt a cold, hard clarity crystallize in his soul. The illusion was gone. The fog of denial had lifted. He wasn't their beloved uncle. He was a resource, and the resource had just been deemed inconvenient. He had been trying to fill a void in his life with their presence, but he now realized he was just filling a void in their bank accounts. And that was about to end. He still had no idea what he would do, but he knew with absolute certainty that something fundamental had shifted. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. That evening, the Nephews arrived for their customary visit, their smiles as wide and insincere as a politician's on election day. They breezed in, bringing the cold autumn air with them, their eyes immediately flicking to the coffee table. But the usual offering, a crisp, white envelope containing a few $100s, was conspicuously absent. Instead, Arthur sat in his worn leather armchair, the one molded perfectly to the shape of his body over decades of use. He wasn't looking at the television or reading the paper. He was just sitting, watching them, a calm, unnerving resolve in his eyes that they had never seen before. It was the look of a man who had made a decision. Leo, ever the front man, broke the awkward silence. "Hey, Uncle Art," he began, his tone a practiced mix of casual affection and entitlement. He gestured vaguely, his hand already implicitly outstretched. "We were thinking of a weekend trip. Vegas, maybe. A little something to tide us over would be, a huge help." Arthur looked at them. He truly looked at them, perhaps for the first time in years, without the softening filter of his own loneliness. He saw not the rambunctious boys he had helped raise, the ones he'd taught to ride bikes and bait a fishing hook. He saw two young men whose faces were smooth and unlined, yet whose spirits were already old with a casual, bottomless greed. He saw the lazy calculation in their eyes, the practiced ease with which they prepared to take from him. "The piggy bank is empty," he said. His voice was not angry, not sad, not even disappointed. It was even and steady, as flat and final as a gravestone. The effect was instantaneous. Leo's hand, which had been halfway to his pocket, froze in mid-air. Daniel, who had been inspecting a framed photo on the mantelpiece with feigned interest, turned slowly. Their smiles faltered, then vanished, replaced by identical masks of confused disbelief. "What?" Leo stammered, his charm offensive, short-circuiting. "What do you mean, empty? Is this a joke?" "No joke," Arthur replied, his gaze unwavering. "There's no more. The well is dry." He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't mention medical bills or a bad investment or any other lie that might have softened the blow. He just stated it as a fact. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. It was a silence filled with their thwarted expectations and his newfound, unyielding resolve. They had come expecting a transaction, and for the first time the merchant had refused to sell. They left not with a bang, but with a confused, resentful whimper, leaving behind a silence in the house that felt different. It was no longer the sound of absence, it was the sound of peace. But Arthur knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that this was only the opening salvo. They wouldn't give up that easily. He had merely closed a door. Now they would try to break it down. The week that followed was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. A week of absolute silence was followed by the first coordinated attack. The phone rang, and it was his sister, Carol, her voice tight with a carefully curated concern. "Arthur, it's me. Leo and Daniel told me what happened. They're worried about you?" she said. The word worried carrying the weight of 100 unspoken accusations. "They said you seemed off, not yourself. Is everything all right? Are you feeling okay?" Arthur played his first card. He let a sigh of manufactured weariness travel down the line. "Oh, you know, Carol. Getting older. Things slip my mind sometimes. The bills, they just pile up. It's all a bit much to manage these days." He let the sentence hang in the air, a piece of bait dangling tantalizingly before a school of sharks. He could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. He's losing it. He's admitting it himself. He was planting a seed, and he knew they would cultivate it with all the avarice they possessed. The next phase of their campaign was a sudden, saccharine interest in his health. They showed up unannounced one afternoon, bearing a grocery bag filled with healthy foods, kale, quinoa, and other things Arthur wouldn't have eaten on a dare. "We were just worried you weren't eating right, Uncle Art," Daniel said, his face a mask of filial piety. He placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem supportive, but felt like a man measuring a tree before felling it. They asked about his doctor's appointments, his medication, his sleep schedule. They weren't asking about his well-being. They were gathering intelligence, probing for weaknesses they could exploit. Arthur, for his part, played the role of the slightly befuddled, grateful old man to perfection. He allowed them to help him organize his mail, watching with grim satisfaction as their eyes lingered on the envelopes from his bank and his investment broker. He let them see his confusion over a utility bill. He was giving them exactly what they wanted, the image of a man whose grip was slipping, a man in desperate need of management. He was letting them build their own cage, piece by piece, confident that they would be the ones to lock the door behind them. He knew this was a dangerous game. At any moment, one wrong move could unravel his entire plan, but he had to see it through. The charade culminated in what they dramatically staged as an intervention. They brought Carol again, this time as their emotional battering ram. The three of them stood in his living room, their faces arranged in expressions of grave concern, like doctors about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "Arthur, we need to talk," Carol began, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "The boys and we're just so worried. You're not taking care of yourself, you're isolating. And your finances, we think you're being erratic." "Uncle," Daniel chimed in, his voice dripping with a feigned sympathy that was almost physically nauseating. "We just want to help, we think. Maybe it's time we helped you handle your accounts. Take the pressure off you. Make sure you're, secure." This was it. This was the moment they had been working towards. The checkmate they thought they had so cleverly orchestrated. They saw a frail, confused old man cornered and outmaneuvered. They were about to suggest a power of attorney, the legal key to his kingdom. They looked at him with pity and a barely concealed triumph. They had no idea that they weren't looking at a cornered mouse. They were looking at the man who had built the trap. A slow, genuine smile spread across Arthur's face, an expression so out of place in the grim theatre they had constructed that it visibly unnerved them. It was not the smile of a man who was senile or confused. It was the smile of a chess master who had seen the end of the game 10 moves ago. "Oh, I'm thinking more clearly than ever," he said, his voice now devoid of any feigned weakness. It was clear, firm, and resonant with an authority they hadn't heard in years. He rose slowly from his armchair, every movement deliberate. He wasn't the shuffling old man they'd been patronizing for weeks. He was a pillar of quiet strength. He gestured to the mantelpiece, towards a small, ornate wooden box. It was a beautiful thing, carved from dark cherry wood, a gift from Eleanor on their 25th anniversary. It had always been a sacred object in their house, a keeper of small, meaningless treasures, a seashell from their honeymoon, a dried corsage, a ticket stub from their first date. "You want to know where the money is?" he asked, his voice calm, his eyes locking onto Leo's. "You're so worried about my future, my security. Well, it's in there. Everything I've saved, it's all in that box for my future." The shift in the room was electric. The pretense of concern evaporated in an instant, replaced by a raw, naked avarice that was horrifying to behold. Leo's eyes, wide and rapacious, fixed on the box as if it were the Holy Grail. The carefully constructed masks of his nephews and sister crumbled to dust, revealing the greedy, grasping faces beneath. Unable to contain himself, propelled by a lust for money that overrode all sense and decency, Leo lunged for the box. His hands, clumsy with greed, fumbled with the delicate brass latch. He shot a triumphant, contemptuous look at Arthur, a look that said, "You old fool, you just handed us everything." His breath caught in his throat as he finally pried it open. He threw back the lid, expecting to see stacks of cash, stock certificates, gold coins, the treasure he believed was his by right. Instead, a soft puff of fragrant dust and dried, faded rose petals, the last bouquet Arthur had given Eleanor, billowed into his face, making him cough. Inside, nestled amongst the withered, century-old blooms, was nothing. Nothing but a single, yellowed photograph. It was a picture of Arthur and Eleanor on their wedding day 60 years ago. They were young, vibrant, and incandescently happy, their smiles a testament to a love and a life built on things the boys had never bothered to understand. It was a picture of the real treasure. Stunned, absolute silence filled the room. It was a silence heavier than any before it, thick with the weight of their own grotesque ugliness, now laid bare for all to see. Leo stared into the box, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning, sickening horror. Daniel looked from the box to his uncle, his jaw slack. Carol simply covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Arthur's voice, now firm and unwavering as granite, cut through the thick air. "The real treasure," he said, his words landing like hammer blows, "was the love and support and family I gave you freely every single day. The treasure was the belief I had in you. You were just too blind and too greedy to see it. Now you see what's left for you." He let the words sink in, watching as the full weight of their moral bankruptcy crashed down upon them. They had spent weeks plotting, manipulating and deceiving, all for an inheritance that existed only in their own craven imaginations. They hadn't just been denied money, their very character had been held up to a mirror, and the reflection was monstrous. "Get out!" Arthur said, his voice low, but carrying an immense power. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply pointed to the front door. "Get out of my house!" They scrambled to leave, not walking, but scurrying, like insects exposed when a rock is overturned. They couldn't look at him. They couldn't look at each other. The shame was a palpable thing in the air. As the front door clicked shut behind them, sealing them out of his life for good, a profound sense of peace settled over Arthur. The silence that returned to the house was different. It was not empty. It was not the sound of loneliness. It was clean. It was the quiet, resonant hum of self-respect reclaimed and restored. The piggy bank was indeed empty, but for the first time in a very long time, Arthur felt truly, immeasurably rich. A few days later, Arthur went out to the driveway. The Mustang sat there, a silent monument to the catalyst of his liberation. He popped the hood, his old, gnarled hands moving with a long-forgotten confidence. He spent the afternoon tinkering, methodically checking the battery, the plugs, the wiring. And then he saw it, a single, crucial wire, frayed and disconnected from the terminal. A simple fix. He reconnected it, cleaned the contacts, and closed the hood. He slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of old leather and gasoline welcoming him home. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful rumble that vibrated through his entire body. It was the sound of a heart once stalled, now beating strong again. He was back in the driver's seat, in every sense of the word. In the end, Arthur didn't just expose his nephew's greed, he reclaimed his own life from the quiet desperation that had consumed it. He proved that the most valuable assets we have, dignity, wisdom, and self-worth, are not kept in a bank or a box, but are forged in the choices we make when we are tested. He lost family, but in doing so, he found himself again. So he showed that true strength isn't about the money you can give, but the boundaries you can set. But what do you think? Was his lesson too harsh, or was it exactly what they deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, please support it with a like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.